The silence is the first thing you notice. It has a weight to it, a physical presence. It is not an absence of sound, but a different kind of sound altogether. It is the echo of 80,000 voices that have gone home, the ghost of noise that lingers in the steel rafters and the hollowed-out plastic seats. You stand on the field or you sit on the bench long after everyone has left and you listen to it. This silence is nothing like the quiet of a morning. It is heavy. It is loaded. It is the repository of every shout, every cheer, every screamed curse, and every gasped prayer from just hours before. And in that dense, ringing quiet, a man can hear himself think for the first time all week. The problem is, he often does not like what he hears. We are taught to believe the roar is the soundtrack of their lives. The explosion of the crowd on a touchdown, the orchestrated chaos of a third down stop, the collective, rolling thunder that greets a team emerging from the tunnel. We buy that noise. We pay for it. We are part of it. It is the proof of life for the spectacle. But I have come to understand that the roar is a lie. Or at least it is only half of the truth. The real story, the human story, is not found in the roar. It is found in the silence that follows it. It is in that quiet where the price is counted, where the adrenaline bleeds out and leaves only the raw nerve, where the scripted narrative of the game falls away and leaves the unscripted reality of a body and a mind that have been used as instruments of violence. I remember one man telling me about his final sound. It was not a roar. It was a pop. A sound so clean, so precise, so utterly singular that it cut through the wall of crowd noise as if that noise were just static on a radio. He was a wide receiver, known for his graceful routes and soft hands. His final play was a simple crossing route over the middle. He told me he remembers the ball leaving the quarterback's hand, a tight spiral against the bright sky of the dome. He remembers the feeling of separation from the defender, that microsecond of freedom where the play is working. And then he remembers the pop. Came from his own left knee. It was not the sound of a hit because the defender's tackle was low and from the side, a legal and common football play. The pop was internal. It was the sound of his own interior cruciate ligament, the fibrous band of tissue that holds the dream together, snapping like a dried twig. He said in that moment the 80,000 people vanished. The game vanished. There was only that sound, and then a cold, clinical void of pain so total it was like a light going out. He lay on that artificial turf, the breath knocked from him not by the tackle, but by the shock of his own body betraying him. The trainers came. The cart came. He was taken down the tunnel, not to a locker room, but to a silent, fluorescent-lit room for an MRI. The roar was gone. In its place was the hum of the machine, the murmured voices of doctors, and the deafening realization growing in his own mind. He was 26 years old. He had just signed a contract extension. He was, in the language of the league, just entering his prime. And on that table, listening to the mechanical whirring, he knew. He knew with a certainty that felt like a death sentence. He would never be who he was again. The league would move on. The team would move on. The next man was already up, lacing his cleats, hearing the roar. But for him, the soundtrack of his life had just permanently changed. The pop had replaced the roar. This is where our story begins. Not with a championship parade, not with a Hall of Fame induction, but on a cold table in the bowels of a stadium. It begins in the sterile quiet of a surgeon's office, where a young man is shown a black and white image of his own ruined knee and told the Greek and Latin words that mean the end. It begins on a couch at 3 in the afternoon, months after the season has ended, when a former linebacker stares at a blank television screen, his body aching with a pain that has no purpose anymore, the silence of his living room mocking him. It begins with the phone call that does not come, the off-season when your agent's number stops flashing on your screen, and you are left with the quiet understanding that you have been erased from the league's memory. We celebrate the longevity legends, the men who play for 15, 16 seasons. We speak of them as warriors, as Iron Men, and they are. But for every one of them, there are 100 whose careers ended with a whisper, not a celebration. Their jerseys were not retired. They were quietly collected from their lockers, laundered, and issued to someone else. Their names were not etched on trophies. They were moved to the reserve/injured, list on a transaction wire no fan ever reads. Their final season was not a farewell tour. It was a collection of ordinary plays that ended, suddenly and forever, with one that was not ordinary at all. A cut on a route that the knee could no longer make. A block where the shoulder gave way. A tackle where the neck and spine communicated a new and final kind of protest. Or sometimes it was not even a physical break, but a mental one. The moment the fear outweighed the love. The moment the thought of one more concussion, one more blindside hit, became a wall they could not run through. The league has a phrase for this inevitable churn. They call it next man up. It is meant to be a mantra of resilience, of depth, of team-first mentality. And on its surface, it is. It speaks to preparation, to opportunity. But if you listen closer, in the silence after the coach says it in a press conference, you hear its darker echo. Next man up means the man who went down is already forgotten. His role is fungible. His absence is a logistical problem to be solved, not a human loss to be mourned. The machine must keep running. The show must go on. The phrase sanitizes the brutality of replacement. It turns a personal catastrophe into a simple matter of roster management. What happens to the man who could not stay up? What is the true cost of maintaining a system that depends upon, a steady supply of broken men to be replaced by fresh ones? This documentary is not about the glory of the game. That story has been told, and told brilliantly. It is about the bill that comes due. It is about the broken dreams that are the necessary fuel for the dream factory. We will follow the arc of a career not to its zenith, but to its abrupt, often brutal stopping point. We will look at the body as a ticking clock, and the league as the force that wins it ever tighter, knowing it will eventually break. We will move from the playing field to the operating table, from the film room to the disability office, from the adrenaline rush of Sunday to the profound stillness of a Monday morning when you are 29 years old and your life's purpose has been medically invalidated. We will meet men whose final play became the defining moment of their lives, overshadowing everything that came before it. We will hear from the doctors who try to put them back together, and the lawyers who fight for them when the league moves on. We will examine the cold economics that make a damaged player a liability to be excised, and the cultural machinery that glorifies the sacrifice while quietly discarding the sacrificer. This is a story about the end, the unplanned end, the forced retirement. The dream was interrupted not by a choice, but by a fracture. Pop in the silence. The league's relentless entertainment product requires peak physical specimens performing at the absolute limit of human capability. That limit has a breaking point. The business requires cost control and roster flexibility under a hard salary cap. That requires a constant churn of labor. The dream requires a relentless influx of new hope to sustain its power. That requires discarding the old hope when it is exhausted. The machine is designed to consume youth and spit out veterans. The tragedy of the individual player who hears the pop is that he is experiencing exactly what the system, for all its pageantry and promises, expected of him all along. He has not failed the system. The system has succeeded in using him up. Over the course of this series, we will follow this brutal life cycle. We will begin with the physical cataclysm, the hit that ends it all in an instant, and then delve into the slower, more insidious decay of the body and mind. We will explore the profound identity crisis that follows the final whistle, and investigate the pharmacological pipeline of pain management that keeps players on the field while shortening their careers and lives. We will enter the operating room and the rehab clinic, where medical science fights a losing battle against football time. We will unpack the cold financial equations that make a damaged player a liability, and trace the roots of this mentality back to the very moment young men are commodified at the NFL scouting combine. We will examine the immense pressures on coaches that create moral dilemmas and scrutinize the complex, often conflicted role of the Players Association. We will analyze how the media's storytelling perpetuates the cycle, and we will sit with the families who bear the heaviest burdens long after the crowd has forgotten. We will follow the grueling, demoralizing battle for disability benefits, and we will also find glimmers of hope in stories of successful reinvention. Finally, we will remember the lost and ask the uncomfortable question of whether this system can ever truly change, or if the broken dream is the forever cost of our Sunday devotion. This is a journey from the roar to the silence, from the promise to the price, from the asset to the aftermath. We are about to look behind the shield, not to see villains, but to understand a machine. A machine that produces glorious dreams and broken men in equal measure. The two are inextricably linked. One cannot exist without the other. This is the true, unvarnished story of the National Football League. Teams can sever the agreement with relative impunity, citing failure to perform or, more often, simply a roster move. The injured reserve list is not just a medical designation. It is a financial and strategic tool. The next man up philosophy is not merely a coaching cliché. It is a direct reflection of a system built on the assumption of attrition. The machine anticipates breakage. It budgets for it, plans for it. The dream may be about permanence, but the business model is rooted in disposability. The romance of the game exists for us, the audience. For the institution, it is a supply chain, and the human body is the most perishable good in the warehouse. When we speak of being forced out, then we must broaden our definition far beyond the catastrophic season-ending hit. That is merely the most visible and dramatic exit. The forced retirement is a spectrum of defeat. It is the career-altering injury, like a torn Achilles or a shattered shoulder, that allows a player to return but robs him of the elite physical trait that defined him, making him ordinary in a league that has no use for ordinary. It is the psychological trauma, the accumulation of concussions that leaves a man afraid of the very contact that made him great, or the anxiety and depression that hollows him out from within. It is being aged out, the cruel, gradual decline where a step is lost, a fraction of a second disappears, and a 32-year-old veteran finds himself unemployed not because he is bad, but because a 24-year-old draft pick is cheaper and theoretically more durable. It is the systemic mismanagement of health, the painkiller injections that mask damage until it becomes irreversible, the rushed rehab timelines that prioritize a playoff run over a lifelong joint. And perhaps most insidiously, it is the erosion of personal identity. To understand the epidemic of broken dreams, we must first understand the potency of the dream itself. The National Football League did not just become a sports league. It engineered the most compelling and lucrative dream factory in American life. From the sandlots of childhood to the bright lights of prime time, the narrative is meticulously crafted and relentlessly sold. It is a promise of transformation. It tells a young boy that through strength, through pain, through sacrifice, he can achieve immortality. He can turn his body into a weapon, his aggression into art, his name into a brand. He can rise from obscurity to fame, from poverty to generational wealth. He can earn the love of millions, the respect of his city, a permanent place in the history of a game that has become a secular religion. This is the NFL Dream Machine, and it runs on an endless supply of hope. It is a dream so powerful, so culturally sanctified, that it convinces young men to trade the long-term sanctity of their bodies for the short-term thrill of its fulfillment. They are not drafted into a job. They are anointed into a myth. The promise is legacy. The unspoken price is often the future itself. But behind the myth stands the machine. And the machine is, first and foremost, a business of breathtaking coldness and efficiency. The emotions are for the fans. The operations are governed by the hard math of the salary cap and the unforgiving small print of the collective bargaining agreement. This is the true engine of the league, and it is designed for one overriding purpose: to manage risk and maximize profit. A player is not a hero in this ledger. He is an asset. His value is quantified in a number on a cap sheet, his performance projected in statistical models, his health assessed as a liability risk. The contract he signs, celebrated with a handshake and a jersey, is a monument to contingency. Large portions of it are not guaranteed. Football demands total immersion. It strips away other facets of a man's life and rebuilds his self-worth entirely around his utility on the field. When that utility ends, whether by injury or obsolescence, the man left behind often feels like a stranger to himself. He is forced out of his own life. This is the hidden cost the dream machine rarely accounts for. This dynamic is not a new flaw in a modern system. It is woven into the fabric of the game's history, evolving alongside its popularity and profitability. In the league's early, grittier days, careers were shorter and the medical understanding was primitive. A player was expected to play hurt as a point of pride. Retirement was often a slide into obscurity, with no pension, no health care, and little public concern for the aftermath. As the league exploded into a televised cultural juggernaut in the latter half of the 20th century, the stakes grew higher. The players became bigger, faster, and more valuable. The injuries became more severe, but so did the incentives to hide them and play through them. The business became more sophisticated, codifying the disposability into complex rules like the salary cap in the 1990s, which explicitly tied a player's value to a number, making older, injured veterans financial obstacles to be cleared. What was once a rugged, unspoken code has been refined into a sleek corporate process. The forced retirement has been bureaucratized. It is now managed by general managers with spreadsheets, negotiated by agents and lawyers, and communicated through a sterile press release that wishes the player the best in his future endeavors. The language is cleaner. The outcome is the same. Therefore, the central argument of this documentary is this: the forced retirement of NFL players is not a bug in the system. It is a feature. It is not an unfortunate byproduct of a violent game. It is a calculated, managed, and necessary outcome of its economic and cultural model. There is a mythology around the career-ending hit. In the collective imagination, it is a brutal, illegal act, a cheap shot from a vicious opponent, a moment of such flagrant violence that it sparks outrage and suspensions. It fits a narrative of good versus evil, of a martyr felled by a villain. But the truth is far more mundane, and in its mundanity, far more terrifying. Most careers are not ended by a crime. They are ended by a legal, ordinary football play. The hit that changes everything is often one you have seen 1,000 times. It is a standard tackle, a routine block, a standard cut on a route. There is no penalty flag. There is no gasp from the announcers. The defender often gets up and jogs back to the huddle. It is the terrifying simplicity of it. The margin between a highlight and a horror story is a matter of millimeters of torque, of the exact angle at which a joint is loaded. It is the sound of physics, not malice, that ends a dream. This is the story not of an outlaw hit, but of an in-law one. A hit that was within the rules of the game, but outside the rules of the human body's endurance. Consider the story of a young man we will call David. David was a rookie tight end, a third-round draft pick known for his soft hands and surprising athleticism. He was not a superstar, but he was a promise, a piece of the future. His first training camp was a success. He made the roster, earned a role on special teams, and caught his first touchdown pass in week 4. The coaches were excited. The veterans liked him. He was living the dream, moving from the practice field to the bright lights with the dizzying speed of a modern rookie. His 9th NFL game was on the road, a cold November afternoon in an opposing stadium. The play was a simple shallow cross. David ran his route, made the catch in stride, and turned upfield. A linebacker, filling his zone, met him. It was not a helmet-to-helmet hit. It was not a dirty tackle. It was a form-perfect, shoulder-led wrap-up, the kind coaches teach on Tuesday mornings. David's left leg was planted. his body twisting to evade the contact. The linebacker's weight drove through his own shoulder and into David's knee from the side. The mechanics were a perfect storm. There was a pop, audible to David alone in the universe of his own body. He went down. There was no drama. The play was over. The linebacker helped him up. David took one step and his leg buckled. It was not a buckle of pain. It was a mechanical failure. The joint simply refused to bear weight. That was the moment. The exact, precise second his career trajectory changed from ascendant to terminal. He did not know it yet. He still had hope. Hope is the body's first responder to trauma. The immediate aftermath is a blur of controlled chaos. The trainers arrive, their faces masks of professional concern. They ask the simple, stupid questions designed to gauge consciousness. Where are you? What's the score? David answered them, his eyes fixed on the sky, his mind already detaching from the scene. The cart arrives, that dreaded, humiliating chariot. The ride off the field is the loneliest journey in sports. You are leaving the tribe, the battle, and entering a medical protocol. The crowd's applause is sympathetic, but it feels like a farewell. In the locker room, the team doctor performs a preliminary Lockman test, manipulating the knee. His face does not change, but a subtle tightening around his eyes tells David everything. There is too much play in the joint. The knee is loose in a way it should not be. An MRI is ordered for the next morning. That night, in a hotel room, alone with the throbbing in his knee and the ice machine whirring beside him, the fear sets in. It is not the fear of pain, but the fear of the unknown. The fear of the image that will be on the screen tomorrow. The MRI is a coffin of light. You lie perfectly still, encased in the white tube, and for 30 minutes the only sound is the machine's violent, rhythmic knocking. It sounds like a hammer. It is taking pictures of the wreckage. Later, in the surgeon's office, the image is displayed on a large monitor. To the untrained eye, it is a confusing landscape of grays and blacks. The surgeon, using a pen as a pointer, traces the anatomy. Here is your femur. Here is your tibia. This dark line here should be your anterior cruciate ligament. You see how it's not there? It's ruptured. Completely torn. We also have a grade 2 MCL sprain and a meniscus tear. The words are clinical, clean. They are Greek and Latin terms that mean one thing in English. Your season is over. And for a player on the fringe, a rookie without a proven track record, it often means more. It means your career is in critical condition. The surgery is scheduled. It is presented as a solution, a path back. And it is biologically, but in NFL terms, it is the beginning of a long, uncertain exile. This is when the league's response machinery engages. It is efficient, sterile, and emotionally void. The team places David on injured reserve. The public announcement is a single line in the daily transaction report. Place T. David Smith on reserve/injured. His locker is cleaned out, not as a punitive measure, but as a practical one. His nameplate may remain, but his space is given to a healthy body. He is no longer part of the daily rhythm of the team. While his teammates practice, he is in the training room doing lonely, monotonous rehab exercises. While they travel to games, he is at the facility working with a physical therapist. He becomes a ghost in the building. The camaraderie, the joking, the shared purpose, it all slowly evaporates. His relationships with coaches, once based on his utility on the field, become strained by pity and irrelevance. They ask how he's doing, but the question is a formality. Their focus is on the players who can play. This is the slow fade. You are not cut, not yet. You are in purgatory. You are a living reminder of the sport's risk, and you are slowly being moved to the periphery of the organization's vision. Concurrent with this social exile is the financial conversation. For a drafted rookie, his contract is likely not guaranteed for injury. The team is obligated to pay him his salary for the season he is injured, but they are under no obligation to keep him beyond that. His agent begins to have quiet conversations with the front office about an injury settlement. This is a cold calculus. The team offers a lump sum of money to essentially buy out the remainder of his contract and release him, waiving any future liability for his care. The amount is negotiated based on how long the doctors estimate his recovery will take. It is a severance package for a broken body. For the player, it is a devastating crossroads. Do you take the settlement, a finite sum of money, and bet on yourself to recover fully and try out for another team? Or do you reject it, stay on the team's IR, and hope they see a future for you after the long, arduous rehab? Most, facing uncertainty and the fear of being forgotten, take the settlement. It feels like control, even as it signs away your last tie to the organization that drafted you. David had the surgery. He spent 9 months in rehab. He worked harder than he ever had in his life. The process is a brutal lesson in humility. You must relearn how to walk, how to balance, how to trust a limb that has betrayed you. The physical pain is a constant companion, but the psychological pain is worse. The doubt, the fear of re-injury, the sight of your calf muscle atrophied to a shadow of its former self. You watch games on television, and you see your replacement making plays. You see the team moving on, and you are stuck in a windowless room doing leg lifts. When you are finally cleared, a year after the pop, you are not the same athlete. You have lost a step. That explosive first move, the one that separated you from linebackers, is diminished. The knee is stable, but it is not innocent. It sends signals. It stiffens. It aches in the morning. You try out for a new team. You run routes for scouts. You can see it in their eyes. They are not looking at what you can do. They are looking for what you cannot do anymore. They are looking for the hint of a limp, the hesitation on a cut. The promise you once embodied has been replaced by a medical file. David got a few workouts. He was signed to a futures contract, then released at the final roster cuts. The phone stopped ringing. He was 24 years old. The hit lasted less than a second. The aftermath never ends. He was not forced out by a villain. He was forced out by the ordinary, brutal arithmetic of the game he loved. His story is not an anomaly. It is the standard operating procedure for a system that understands that for every star who rises, 100 Davids will fall, their dreams ending not with a bang, but with a pop that only they can hear. If the catastrophic hit is a sudden, shocking fracture in a career's timeline, then the slow bleed is the gradual erosion of the entire landscape. It is not a single pop, but 1,000 tiny creaks and groans that accumulate over years into a deafening chorus of pain. This is the exit strategy no one drafts you for, the one built into the very job description. While the outside world focuses on the dramatic, season-ending injuries, the real epidemic is the degenerative one. It is arthritis that sets in before a man turns 30. It is the chronic pain that becomes a more constant companion than any teammate. It is the neurological fog that descends so slowly you mistake it for aging, until you realize you are aging at twice the normal speed. This is the price of repetition, of collisions that may not knock you out of a game, but knock something loose inside you forever. The slow bleed does not make headlines. It makes for a long, private suffering. It is the career that ends not on a surgeon's table, but on 1,000 mornings when getting out of bed feels like a monumental achievement. To understand this, you must listen to a man like Marcus. Marcus played offensive guard for 10 seasons. He was never a pro bowler, but he was what coaches call a solid, reliable starter. A grunt in the trenches. His job every Sunday was to collide with the largest, strongest, and fastest men on the planet. He estimates he participated in over 60,000 plays from scrimmage in his career. 60,000 moments of controlled violence. He never had a major surgery. He never tore an ACL or ruptured an Achilles. He was, by NFL standards, remarkably durable. And yet, by his 8th season, his body was a map of quiet rebellions. His knees, he said, sounded like a bowl of Rice Krispies when he walked downstairs in the morning. Snap, crackle, pop. His shoulders ached with a deep, bony persistence that no amount of anti-inflammatories could fully silence. His fingers were permanently swollen and bent at odd angles from years of jamming them into helmets and shoulder pads. He developed bone spurs in his ankles, little daggers of calcification that ground with every step. This was not injury, he was told. This was wear and tear. It was normal. It was the cost of doing business. The training staff managed it. Toradol shots before games turned the pain into a distant murmur. Ice baths and stim machines were a daily ritual. He learned to distinguish between good pain, the soreness of work, and bad pain, the sharp warning of something tearing. But eventually the line blurred. All pain just became the background noise of his existence. The moral dilemma at the heart of the slow bleed is the culture of playing through pain. From the earliest days of Pop Warner, players are taught that toughness is the ultimate virtue. To come out of a game is a sign of weakness. To admit you are hurt is to betray the tribe. In the NFL, this ethos is codified into a high-stakes gamble. Your job security depends on your availability. The man behind you on the depth chart is hungry for your position. The coaches, while paying lip service to player health, need you on the field to win games. There is an unspoken, immense pressure to convert your pain into a number. Can you play at 80%? Can you play at 70? The decision is almost never a clear-cut medical yes or no. It is a gray area of pain tolerance, personal fear, and professional obligation. Marcus told me about a game in his 9th season. His back had been tightening for weeks, a common issue for linemen. During a pass play, he felt a seizing sensation, a muscle locking up as he engaged a defender. He finished the play, but as he walked back to the huddle, a cold fear shot through him. He could not fully straighten up. He played the next 10 snaps in a slight stoop, protecting his back, his technique compromised. He knew he was a liability. He knew he risked a more serious injury, but he also knew that if he came out, the coaches would see it as him quitting. The backup would play and might play well, and suddenly his job, his identity would be in jeopardy. So he stayed in. He played through. That, he said, was the moment he truly understood the bargain. The league did not just buy his skill. It bought his willingness to ignore his own body's screams. The neurological decline is the most insidious facet of the slow bleed. It is not a broken bone you can see on an X-ray. It is the accumulation of subconcussive hits, the thousands of helmet-to-helmet collisions in the pit that never result in a diagnosed concussion but rattle the brain nonetheless. Players call it getting your bell rung. It is treated as a momentary dizziness, a thing to shake off. But what if you shake your bell 10,000 times? Marcus began to notice subtle changes. He would forget simple play calls in the huddle, something that had never happened before. He would lose his train of thought in conversations. He had headaches that lingered for days after games. He became irritable, short with his family. He chalked it up to stress, to fatigue. But a part of him wondered. He had seen the stories about CTE. He had attended the funeral of a former teammate who had struggled with depression and memory loss. The fear was no longer of a career-ending hit, but of a life-altering decay. The slow bleed was not just in his joints. It was in his mind. How do you report an injury you cannot see to a system that is only just beginning to acknowledge the problem? You often don't. You hide it. You blame yourself. You hope it's just in your head, which is the cruelest irony of all. The end for a player like Marcus is rarely a dramatic release. It is a negotiation with his own diminishing returns. In his 10th training camp, he could no longer get through a full practice without his body breaking down. The recovery time between sessions stretched longer and longer. The younger, cheaper draft pick beside him moved with an ease and flexibility Marcus could only remember. He was not suddenly bad. He was just slower, stiffer, more predictable. The team kept him on the roster that final season, a veteran presence, but his playing time dwindled. He became a mentor, a teacher. It was a respectful demotion, but a demotion nonetheless. He was being phased out, and he knew it. The decision to retire, when it came, was his in name only. The league had made it for him by making his body obsolete. There was no final press conference. There was a quiet meeting with the general manager after the season, a handshake, and a discussion about a one-day contract to retire as a member of the team for publicity purposes. He declined. The slow bleed had taken too much for a symbolic gesture to matter. The aftermath of this kind of retirement is a particular kind of purgatory. Because there is no single defining injury, there is often no dramatic disability claim to file. You are just a man in his early 30s with the body of someone 30 years older. The chronic pain becomes your full-time occupation. The morning routine of stretching, of heating pads, of pain medication replaces the football routine. The psychological adjustment is brutal. You spent a decade teaching your brain to ignore pain signals, to push through barriers. Now, you must learn to listen to those signals, to respect them, but the wiring is fried. The discipline that made you a professional athlete now works against you, driving you to push too hard in rehabilitation, to deny the new, permanent limits of your physical being. Marcus said the hardest moment was taking his son to the park a year after retirement. His boy wanted to play catch, a simple game of catch. Marcus's shoulder, ravaged by a decade of interior combat, would not allow him to throw a spiral more than 10 yards. The ball flopped out of his hand, a pathetic, aching thing. His son looked confused. Dad, why can't you throw? In that moment, the true cost of the slow bleed became clear. It was not the lost money or the lost fame. It was the lost ability to be the father he wanted to be. The game had taken the currency of his physicality and spent it all, leaving him with nothing but the receipt, written in the language of pain. His career did not end with a hit. It ended with a whisper, a gradual fading of ability and purpose, until one day he looked in the mirror and saw a man he no longer recognized. A man held together by scars and memories, waiting for the next ache to announce itself. The most devastating injuries in football are the ones you cannot see. They do not show up on an MRI. They do not require a cast or a surgical repair. They exist in the silent, private spaces of the mind. While a torn ligament can end a season, a fractured psyche can end a career and a life long before the body gives out. This is the mind's prison. It is built brick by brick from the very violence that defines the sport, from the unbearable pressure to perform, and from the looming existential shadow of a disease that promises to erase you from the inside out. The football culture, which valorizes physical toughness above all else, has historically had no language for this kind of pain. To admit to psychological suffering was the ultimate betrayal of the warrior code. But a new generation of players is forcing a conversation, choosing to walk away from the game not because their bodies are broken, but because their minds are screaming for survival. Their exits are quiet revolutions, and they expose a truth the league has long feared, that the greatest threat to a player's career may not be the opponent across the line of scrimmage, but the enemy within his own skull. Consider the story of a player we will call Jordan. Jordan was a starting safety, known for his ferocious hits and football IQ. He was a leader on defense, the communicator in the secondary. By his 6th season, he had a Pro Bowl appearance and a reputation as one of the hardest hitters in the league. And then, something shifted. It began with a series of concussions. Not major ones that left him unconscious, but the kind that resulted in him feeling foggy for a week, suffering from headaches and sensitivity to light. The protocol would clear him, and he would return to the field. But with each incident, the fear grew. He described it as a tightening in his chest every time he lined up for a play. The violence, which he had once craved and channeled, now felt like a threat. He began to experience intense anxiety before games, something he had never felt before. It wasn't nerves. It was a deep, visceral dread. He would lie awake the night before a game, his heart pounding, playing out catastrophic scenarios in his head. On the field, he found himself hesitating. A split-second hesitation is a lifetime for a professional athlete. Where he once flew to the ball with instinctual abandon, he now calculated the risk. He was protecting himself, and in doing so, he was becoming a liability to his team. The pressure to perform in the NFL is a unique and relentless form of psychological torture. Your worth is quantified publicly every week. Your mistakes are broadcast in high definition and dissected on national television. Your job security is tenuous, dependent on the health and performance of the man behind you. For Jordan, this pressure merged with his growing fear to create a perfect storm. He started having panic attacks. He would be in a team meeting, and a wave of overwhelming fear would wash over him. He felt like he couldn't breathe. He would excuse himself and sit in a bathroom stall until it passed. He knew he needed help, but the stigma was a wall he could not climb. This was a locker room where mental toughness was the highest virtue. How could he tell his coach, a grizzled former player, that he was having panic attacks? How could he tell his teammates, men he had gone to war with, that he was afraid? He felt like a fraud, a coward in a culture of courage. So he hid it. He self-medicated with alcohol to quiet the anxiety at night. He put on a mask of intensity at the facility. But the mask was cracking. His play suffered. Coaches pulled him aside, asking if he was hurt, if something was wrong at home. He lied. He said he was fine. He was trapped in a prison of his own making, built by the very culture that had once celebrated him. The turning point came during a routine practice. A tight end ran a seam route down the middle. Jordan, reading the play, drove forward for the hit. At the last millisecond, he pulled up. It was an instinct of pure self-preservation. He didn't just miss the tackle. He avoided the collision entirely. The tight end scored. The offensive players hooped. The defensive coordinator screamed from the sideline. In that moment, staring at the back of the jersey in the end zone, Jordan knew. The player he had been was gone. The fear had won. The love for the game had been suffocated by the terror of what it was doing to him. He walked to the sideline, took off his helmet, and told his position coach he was done. Not for the day, for good. The reaction was a mixture of confusion, anger, and disbelief. They thought it was a temporary crisis of confidence. They gave him a few days off, but Jordan knew he had reached his breaking point. He sought out a therapist, finally, and began the long, difficult work of unraveling the trauma. His retirement announcement cited personal reasons. The media speculated about undisclosed injuries, family issues, even drug problems. The truth that a premier safety had walked away because he was psychologically traumatized by the violence was too dissonant for the football world to easily accept. He faced quiet accusations of being soft, of quitting on his team. The stigma he feared became his reality. Beyond the immediate psychological trauma of anxiety, depression, and what we can rightly call post-traumatic stress disorder from repeated violence, there looms a larger, more terrifying specter: chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE. The fear of CTE is not like the fear of a torn ACL. An ACL tear has a known treatment, a known rehab timeline. CTE is a mystery box of future suffering. You cannot test for it in a living person. The diagnosis only comes after death. So players are left to live with the terrifying ambiguity of their own symptoms. Is this forgetfulness just normal? Is this irritability just stress? Or is it the early stages of a degenerative brain disease? This shadow influences decisions in profound ways. Young players, seeing the fates of legends like Junior Seau and Ken Stabler, are entering the league with a baseline level of fear that previous generations did not have. Veterans are choosing to retire earlier, not because their bodies can't go on, but because they have decided the potential cost to their brain is too high. They have seen former teammates struggle with mood swings, depression, and cognitive decline. They have attended funerals for men who died by suicide, their brains later found to be ravaged by CTE. This is not a hypothetical risk. It is a gallery of ghosts, and every active player sees himself in those ghosts. The league's response to this mental health crisis has been a slow, reluctant awakening, often driven more by litigation and public relations than by genuine cultural change. Mental health resources are now more available, but the cultural barrier to accessing them remains ever as high. A player can be referred to a counselor, but if the underlying locker room ethos still views psychological struggle as weakness, he will not go. The next man up mentality is psychologically corrosive. It tells a player he is not a person with struggles, but a unit of production that can be replaced if he malfunctions. For players like Jordan who walked away, there is often a profound sense of isolation. They have left the tribe, and the tribe does not understand why. They exist in a no man's land, too broken for football, but often feeling alienated from a civilian world that cannot comprehend the specific horrors they have endured and the fears they carry about their own future. Jordan's story is a landmark, not because it is unique, but because it represents a crack in the fortress of silence. He chose his mind over his career. He chose an uncertain future over a guaranteed path to further psychological ruin. His prison was built by collisions and pressure, but the key was his own courage to admit he was locked inside. For every player who makes that choice, there are dozens more who stay, who silence the screams, who medicate the anxiety, and who hope against hope that the shadow of CTE will not fall on them. The mind's prison is the most insidious form of forced retirement because the sentence is often served while the player is still technically free, still on the roster, still collecting a check, but dying a little inside with every snap, every hit. Every day he is told to ignore the most important warning system he has, his own breaking mind. The game may eventually force his body out, but long before that, it may have already claimed his peace. Retirement, for most people, is a reward. It is the culmination of a career, a time for rest, travel, and hobbies. It is a transition planned for and earned. For the NFL player forced out before his time, retirement is not a reward. It is an amputation. The most profound loss is not the money, not the fame, but the identity. For 15, 20, 25 years, his entire sense of self has been forged in the fire of competition. He was not a person who played football. He was a football player. It was the first line of his biography, the answer to every question about who he was. It dictated his schedule, his friendships, his worth, his purpose. And then one day it is gone. Not through a gradual process of letting go, but through a sudden, often violent severance. What remains is a phantom limb, a profound, aching sensation where a piece of him used to be. He wakes up and the structure that held his life together is vanished. The meetings, the practices, the travel, the game plans, all replaced by a yawning, terrifying emptiness. This is the crisis that follows the physical injury, the psychological injury that few franchises are equipped to treat. The loss of the man he was built to be. The disorientation is total. A veteran linebacker, let's call him Ben, described it to me like this. For my entire adult life, from college to 10 years in the league, I knew what I was supposed to do every day from July to January. My body was on a clock. Get up, eat this, lift that, study this film, be at this meeting at this time, tape your ankles at 10:37 a.m., be on the field at 11:15. It was military precision. Then, after my last neck surgery, they said I was done. Just like that. The first Monday of September, I woke up at 6:30 a.m. out of habit, and I just sat there. I had nowhere to go. No one was expecting me. No game to prepare for. The silence in my own house was louder than any crowd. I walked to my kitchen and just stood there, lost. I was a ghost in my own life. This is a common refrain. The infrastructure of football is all-consuming. It removes the necessity of choice, of self-direction. When it is ripped away, men are left psychologically naked, without the skills to build a new structure for themselves. They have been programmed for a specific, high-stakes mission, and then the mission is aborted with no debriefing. There is no farewell tour for the forced retiree, no final season of tributes, no jersey retirement ceremony, no gradual passing of the torch. There is a phone call from your agent or a quiet meeting with a general manager, and then you are a former player. The public narrative moves on instantly. The team's social media feed is already highlighting the new draft pick who plays your position. Your name disappears from the roster on the website. This abrupt erasure is a psychological shock of the highest order. One day you are on national television. A few months later, you are unrecognizable in a grocery store. Just another large man squeezing avocados. The whiplash of this transition is something the normal world cannot comprehend. A former offensive lineman told me, "You spend your whole life trying to be seen, to be noticed by scouts, by coaches, by fans. You build your entire value on being visible, on being impactful on a stage. And then the lights go off and you realize it was a rented stage. And they've evicted you. Now you have to learn how to be invisible, how to be ordinary. And you have no training for that. It feels like a demotion of your soul. This void, this absence of purpose, is fertile ground for crisis. The what now? Question hangs over every day like a storm cloud. For many, their entire adult intelligence has been focused on reading offenses, mastering a playbook, understanding leverage and technique. These are highly specialized skills with little direct translation to the civilian job market. The search for a new purpose becomes desperate and often dangerous. Some plunge into business ventures without the requisite knowledge, losing savings in the process. Others chase the adrenaline they lost through risky investments or dangerous hobbies. Some retreat into isolation, depressed and adrift. And a tragically high number turn to substance abuse, using alcohol or pills to numb the pain of existence and to quiet the screaming question of their own relevance. The divorce rate spikes in the years immediately following retirement. Relationships that were built around the schedule and status of a football career often crumble under the weight of a confused, depressed, and suddenly present man who does not know who he is supposed to be in his own home. The League and the Players Association have made attempts to address this with transition programs that offer classes on financial literacy and career networking. But these are often band-aids on a hemorrhage. You cannot teach a new identity in a 3-day seminar. You cannot lecture a man into finding a purpose that will replace the all-encompassing, tribe-based, glory-drenched purpose of professional sports. The problem is existential, not logistical. It is about the soul, not the resume. As one retired player bitterly noted, they have a whole department for player engagement when you're playing to keep you focused on football. Where's the department for player disengagement? For helping you unwrap your life from the game? The answer is it barely exists. The machine is designed to produce and consume players. The byproduct, the man left behind, is not its concern. The most successful transitions often come from those who can perform a kind of psychological alchemy. They must learn to separate their self from their sport. They must excavate the core character traits that made them a successful athlete: discipline, work ethic, resilience, leadership, and learn to apply them to a completely foreign arena. A running back becomes a real estate developer, not because he knows construction, but because he understands relentless pursuit of a goal. A defensive end becomes an advocate for former players, channeling his aggression into a fight for justice. But this alchemy is rare, and it requires a level of self-awareness and support that the football environment often beats out of men. The system encourages a singular focus, a monastic dedication to the craft. It does not encourage you to cultivate other interests, to develop a multifaceted identity. You are a weapon, and when the weapon is sheathed for good, the swordsmith has no more use for it. Ben, the linebacker, spent 2 years in what he called the fog. He tried coaching high school football, but it was torture, being so close to the game he could no longer play. He started and failed at a restaurant. He gained weight. He fought with his wife. The phantom limb of his identity ached every Sunday, every fall. His salvation came, ironically, through helping other former players. He connected with a nonprofit that addressed the transition crisis, and in sharing his own story, in seeing his pain reflected in the eyes of others, he began to find a new purpose. He was no longer Ben the linebacker. He became Ben the advocate, the mentor, the wounded healer. It gave him a new structure, a new tribe, but he is the exception. For every Ben, there are many more who never find their way out of the fog, who spend decades haunted by the ghost of their former selves, forever feeling the itch of the phantom limb, the echo of a crowd that will never cheer for them again, searching for a stage whose lights have been permanently extinguished. The NFL's relationship with pain is not just cultural, it is pharmaceutical. To maintain the relentless, week-to-week brutality of the product, the league developed a medicalized system for pain management that prioritized availability over health, creating a pipeline of dependency that has ruined more lives than any single hit. This is the story of how the NFL, for decades, systemically turned its athletes into patients, not for healing, but for performance. It is a story of injections given in training rooms like pre-game rituals, of pill bottles handed out like equipment, and of a catastrophic blurring of the line between treatment and enablement. The goal was simple: keep the asset on the field. The consequence was a generation of players who became prisoners of the very substances that were supposed to liberate them from pain, long after their cleats were hung up for good. To understand the depth of this, you must go back to the culture of the 1990s and 2000s, an era before the concussion crisis fully erupted, when the primary concern was managing the weekly wreckage of the body. The king of this domain was Toradol. Toradol, or ketorolac, is a powerful non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, many times stronger than ibuprofen. Its magic, in NFL terms, was not that it healed anything. It was that it turned off the body's pain signaling. It was a chemical mute button. The Toradol shot became a ubiquitous pre-game ritual, particularly for linemen and linebackers. Players would line up outside the training room, receive an injection in the buttock, and within an hour, they could run through a brick wall and not feel a thing. The problem is, you had run through a brick wall. The drug didn't prevent the damage. It simply silenced the alarm system. Men played with broken bones, with severe sprains, with internal injuries they could not feel. They were superheroes for 3 hours on Sunday. And then, as the drug wore off, they would crash into a wall of agony so profound it required another layer of chemical intervention to manage. This is where the opioids entered the picture. If Toradol was for pre-game loading, opioids like Vicodin, Percocet, and OxyContin were for post-game survival. They were handed out with staggering casualness. A former offensive lineman from that era, let's call him Paul, described the process to me. It was like candy. After a game, you'd get your ankle taped up, and the trainer would hand you a little white envelope. Inside would be maybe 4 or 5 Vicodin. No prescription bottle. No discussion of dosage or risks. Just, here, this'll help. You'd take them to sleep that night, to get on the plane, to get through the next day of film study when everything was seized up. For road games, the envelopes would be distributed on the plane. The message was clear. Your pain is an obstacle to your job, and we are providing the tools to remove it. There was no informed consent about the addictive nature of these drugs. There was no long-term plan for pain management. It was a purely transactional arrangement. Take this, play, repeat. Paul's story is a textbook case of how the pipeline worked. He had chronic knee and shoulder issues. The weekly Toradol shot got him through games. The envelopes of Vicodin got him through the week. Over the course of a season, his tolerance built. The 3 pills he took on Monday no longer took the edge off by Thursday. He began to need them just to practice. Then he needed them to get through a normal day. The pain he was masking was real, but the addiction that grew from its management became a disease in itself. When he was finally cut from his team after 7 seasons, the pipeline was abruptly shut off. The team doctors were no longer there. The white envelope stopped, but his body was still screaming, both from the accumulated damage and from the opioid dependency it had developed. He was cast adrift, a 29-year-old retiree with a broken body and a burgeoning addiction, with no guidance on how to detox or manage his pain in a healthy way. He turned to the street, buying pills from dubious sources, his life spiraling downward. The very system that had extended his career for a few more seasons had poisoned the next decades of his life. The analysis of this practice reveals its cruel transactional logic. The Painkiller Pipeline was a tool for roster management. It artificially extended the shelf life of players. A linebacker with a high ankle sprain who might normally miss 3 weeks could be shot up with Toradol and given opioids to practice, getting him back on the field in 1. This was seen as a medical triumph, a testament to toughness. In reality, it was a form of biological fraud. It allowed teams to extract maximum value from a player's body while deferring the true cost, the exacerbated injury, the surgical interventions that would later be needed, the addiction, onto the player himself long after his contract had expired. The team benefited in the short-term win column. The player inherited a long-term health disaster. It was a perfect example of the NFL's externalization of risk. The league profited from the chemically enabled performance, while the individual absorbed the life-altering consequences. The legal reckoning for this system came in the form of a massive lawsuit, settled in 2019, in which the NFL agreed to pay millions to retired players who alleged the league illegally dispensed painkillers to keep them on the field, leading to addiction and long-term health issues. The lawsuit painted a picture of a cavalier, reckless distribution system, with drugs being given without prescriptions, without medical records, and without regard for the player's long-term well-being. While the league admitted no wrongdoing in the settlement, the case forced a change in protocols. The distribution of opioids is now far more controlled, tracked through prescription programs. The use of Toradol, while still present, is more regulated, with players required to give explicit consent after being warned of the risks, particularly of internal bleeding. But the cultural hangover remains. A generation of players is now navigating middle age battling dual demons: the chronic pain from their injuries and the addiction or dependency forged in the training rooms of their past. Their careers were extended artificially, but their suffering was elongated in kind. The pipeline gave them more Sundays in the sun, but it cast a longer, darker shadow over the rest of their lives. It was a devil's bargain, administered not by a shadowy figure, but by the trusted medical staff of their employers. It proved that the most dangerous hit a player could take was sometimes not from an opponent, but from a needle or a pill offered by a smiling face in a team polo shirt, telling him this was just part of what it took to be a football player. The pipeline is less brazen today, but the fundamental tension remains. When a player's pain conflicts with the team's need for his body on the field, whose interest will the medical staff ultimately serve? The history of the painkiller era suggests we already know the tragic answer. The operating room is where football's broken promises are sent for repair. It is a cathedral of modern science, where surgeons perform miracles of reconstruction, reattaching ligaments, repairing tendons, and reassembling bones with the precision of master craftsmen. These medical advances are why we see players return from injuries that would have been career-ending a generation ago. The torn ACL is no longer a death sentence. It is a 12-month detour. This narrative of the miracle comeback is a pillar of the NFL's mythos. The warrior, forged anew by science, returning to battle. But for every miraculous resurrection that makes the cover of Sports Illustrated, there is a quieter, more somber story unfolding in the same sterile halls. The world of sports medicine is also a frontier, and on that frontier, there are failures, complications, and tragic choices. The surgeon's knife can grant a second chance, but it can also be the instrument that finally severs a career, not through malice, but through the inherent risks of pushing the human body back to its breaking point, often on a timeline dictated not by biology, but by the football calendar. The dual narrative of modern sports medicine is one of breathtaking success and devastating fallout. On one side, we have the triumphs, the ligament grafts that hold, the joint replacements that restore function, the minimally invasive procedures that slash recovery time. These are legitimate medical wonders, and they have extended the careers and improved the quality of life for countless athletes. They fuel the hope that drives every injured player through the monotonous agony of rehabilitation. But on the other side is the reality of experimental procedures, the variability of individual healing, and the immense pressure to accelerate nature's pace. A surgery can be technically perfect, but if the body rejects the graft, if an infection sets in, if scar tissue forms aggressively, the outcome can be catastrophic. Furthermore, the procedures themselves are evolving. The Tommy John elbow surgery common in baseball has its analogs in football, novel techniques for repairing shoulders, knees, and feet that are still being refined. The injured player is not just a patient. He is often a subject in the ongoing experiment of high-performance sports medicine, hoping his body responds like the textbook case, not the statistical outlier. This is where the pressure to return creates an ethical quagmire for the team medical staff. The team doctor and the athletic trainers occupy a uniquely conflicted position. They are employed by the franchise, paid by the same organization that pays the coach who needs his star player back for a playoff push. Yet their ethical oath is to the patient, the player sitting on the examination table. This conflict is the dirty little secret of NFL medicine. When is a player medically cleared? Is it when there is no structural risk of re-injury? Or is it when he can perform at a level that satisfies the coaching staff, even if he is at 70% and playing through significant pain? The rehab timeline for an ACL tear is generally 9 to 12 months for a return to sport. But what if your team is 8-4 and in the playoff hunt in December, and you're at 8 months? The subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, pressure begins. The player feels it, wanting to prove his toughness and value. The coach inquires about his progress with a hopeful tone. The general manager asks for an updated ETA. The team doctor is caught in the middle, trying to balance the long-term health of the athlete's knee against the short-term needs of a win-now business. Consider the case of a promising young cornerback we'll call Isaiah. In his second season, he tore the Lisfranc ligament complex in his foot, a debilitating and notoriously tricky injury. The surgery involved placing screws to stabilize the midfoot. The standard rehab protocol is lengthy, often requiring a full year before cutting and backpedaling at full speed can be safely attempted. Isaiah's team, however, was struggling defensively. The secondary was a weakness. By the time training camp rolled around, 9 months post-surgery, Isaiah was pushing hard to be cleared. He reported to the team doctors that he felt good, that the pain was manageable. The imaging showed the bones had healed. The screws were in place. Medically, he was cleared for football activities. But cleared is a binary term in a non-binary reality. His foot was stable, but it was not yet strong. It had not endured the repetitive, violent stressors of NFL practice. The medical staff, likely feeling the organizational pressure, greenlit his return. Isaiah made it through camp, but in the third preseason game, on a simple plant and break on a curl route, he felt a sharp pain. Not a pop, but a grinding, shearing sensation. The hardware in his foot had held, but the surrounding bones, weakened by accelerated use and incomplete rehabilitation, had developed stress fractures. The initial injury had been repaired, but the rushed return had created a new, more complicated problem. He needed a second surgery, more screws, more bone grafts, another lost season. By the time Isaiah was truly, fully healed, nearly 2 years had passed. The team had moved on, drafting his replacement. His speed, his most precious asset, was now in question. He was labeled injury-prone. He bounced around a few training camps but never made a regular season roster again. His career was not ended by the initial Lisfranc injury, which many players successfully returned from. It was ended by the cascade of complications that followed the decision to return too soon. The surgeon's knife had fixed the first problem, but the system's impatience created a second, insurmountable one. Isaiah's story is not about medical malpractice. It is about the systemic environment that encourages risk-taking with a player's long-term health. The medical staff, in clearing him, had likely followed the letter of their protocol. But had they followed the spirit of, first, do no harm? In a vacuum, perhaps. In the pressurized context of an NFL season, the line becomes dangerously blurred. The advanced world of sports medicine, therefore, is a double-edged sword. It offers the promise of salvation, of cheating the career-ending injury. But that promise is contingent on a perfect alignment of surgical skill, biological cooperation, and, most crucially, time. The NFL machine, however, is fueled by a perpetual shortage of time. The season is short. Careers are shorter. Windows for winning are narrow. In the collision between the slow, deliberate pace of healing and the frantic, urgent pace of the league, the player's body is often the battleground. The surgeon's knife can work miracles, but it cannot perform the ultimate miracle, making a human body adhere to the brutal, unforgiving timetable of professional football. When those two clocks clash, it is the athlete who pays the price, becoming a testament not to medical science's triumph, but to its tragic limits when placed in service of an uncompromising and relentless game. To truly understand why a player is forced out, you must follow the money. The National Football League is a salary cap league, a system designed to enforce competitive balance by putting a hard ceiling on how much each team can spend on player salaries in a given year. This mechanism, celebrated for creating parity on the field, creates a brutal, unforgiving calculus off it. The salary cap is not just a financial rule. It is the engine of disposability. It turns a player's health, age, and performance into variables in a cold equation. His body is not just a vessel for talent. It is an asset on a balance sheet. And like any asset, it is subject to depreciation, risk assessment, and, ultimately, write-offs. In this world, a torn ligament is not just a medical diagnosis. It is a financial liability. A player's 30th birthday is not just a milestone. It is an actuarial event. This is the business of bodies, where the term cap casualty sanitizes the human reality of a veteran being discarded because his cost has begun to outweigh his projected production. The foundation of this system is the non-guaranteed contract. Unlike in Major League Baseball or the National Basketball Association, where large portions of contracts are fully guaranteed, the standard NFL deal is a masterpiece of contingency. Only the signing bonus and sometimes the first year or two of salary are fully guaranteed against skill, injury, or cap-related release. The rest of the money, often the vast majority of it printed in headlines, is notional. It is potential earnings, contingent on the player being on the roster. This structure gives teams immense power. If a player underperforms, gets injured, or simply becomes too expensive relative to a younger alternative, the team can release him with minimal financial consequence, spreading out the dead money from his signing bonus over future years. The player, meanwhile, is left with only the guaranteed portion he has already been paid. His future security vanishes with a line in a transaction report. This is the financial sword of Damocles hanging over every career, ensuring that even stars are never more than one bad season or one serious injury away from becoming expendable. The concept of the cap casualty is the purest expression of this business logic. Typically happens in the off-season. A veteran player, often a respected leader and former Pro Bowler, is due a large roster bonus or a spike in his salary cap number for the coming year. He is still a good player, but perhaps he has lost a step. Perhaps he is coming off a minor surgery. Perhaps the team simply believes a younger, cheaper draft pick can provide 80% of the production at 20% of the cost. The general manager, facing cap constraints, makes the calculation. The emotional attachment, the loyalty, the years of service, these are sentimental luxuries the hard math of the cap does not allow. The player is called in. He is thanked for his service. He is told it's a business decision. He is released. His jersey is removed from the team shop within hours. He becomes a free agent, often at an age where the market for his services is thin. He was not forced out by injury in that moment, but by a spreadsheet. His body, as a financial instrument, had been deemed a poor investment. This asset mentality permeates every decision. From the moment a player is drafted, his value is plotted on a depreciation curve. Peak value is generally assumed to be between the ages of 26 and 29, after he has learned the game but before the cumulative wear has significantly eroded his physical gifts. An injury history is like accident reports on a car's Carfax. It reduces trade value and makes teams hesitant to commit long-term money. Every game missed, every surgery undergone, is a mark against his financial stability. Teams employ armies of actuaries and data analysts who build models projecting a player's future performance and injury risk based on his position, age, and medical history. When a team considers a contract extension, they are not just evaluating a person. They are underwriting a physical commodity with a known statistical likelihood of breakdown. From the agent's perspective, this creates a perpetual high-wire act of advocacy and grim realism. The agent's job is to maximize the client's earnings during the fleeting window of his prime, but they also have the unenviable task of delivering hard truths. A veteran agent described the most difficult conversation. It's when you have to sit down with a client, a guy who has given everything to a team for 8 or 9 years, and tell him that on the open market he's now a one-year, prove-it-deal guy, that the league sees him as a temporary patch, not a building block. You see the defiance in his eyes at first. I'm better than that rookie, and he might be right now, but you have to explain the math. You have to say, they think you have 1 or 2 good years left, and they won't pay a premium for that. They'd rather risk being wrong on a 22-year-old. You're not just negotiating contracts. You're constantly managing the erosion of a man's perceived worth, which he ties directly to his self-worth. The agent becomes the intermediary between the player's belief in his own ability and the league's cold assessment of his body as a depreciating asset. The business of bodies ensures that forced retirement is often a financial event before it is a physical one. Player may feel he can still play. His doctor may clear him. But if no team is willing to invest even the league minimum in his body based on its age and medical ledger, his career is over. He has been priced out of the market. This is perhaps the most impersonal form of exit. There is no final hit, no dramatic press conference. There is just the silent phone. There is just the silent phone. The empty inbox. The realization that your asset value has hit zero, and the corporation has closed your file. The game celebrates the warrior, but the business model is designed to retire him the moment his economic utility begins to decline, often years before his spirit is ready to let go. It is a system that professes loyalty on Sundays but operates with the ruthless efficiency of a futures market the rest of the week, trading in the only commodity that truly matters, the health and youth of the human body. The NFL draft is presented as a celebration of dreams realized. It is a 3-day spectacle of hope, a redemptive narrative where young men from humble beginnings walk across a stage, don a new hat, and step into a future of unimaginable wealth and glory. It is the culmination of the Dream Machine's promise. But to view the draft only through this lens is to miss its darker, more foundational truth. The draft is not a ceremony. It is a marketplace, and the commodities being bought and sold are human bodies. The spectacle in prime time is merely the closing bell. The real work, the evaluation and commodification, happens weeks earlier in the cold, clinical environment of the NFL scouting combine. This is where the system's true nature is laid bare, where the language of football gives way to the language of livestock and mechanics. The draft's dark promise is this: we will make you a millionaire, but first we must strip you down to your component parts, assess your durability, and assign you a value. Your dream is our business, and your body is the product. The combine is a surreal and dehumanizing ritual. Hundreds of the best college football players in the world are brought to a single city, dressed in identical skin-tight shirts and shorts, and subjected to a battery of tests that have little to do with football skill. They are weighed and measured like cuts of meat. They jump vertically from a standstill. They run in a straight line for 40 yards, a test of raw speed that often outweighs years of game tape. They are poked, prodded, and interrogated by doctors representing all 32 teams. The medical examination is the most invasive and telling part of the process. Players stand naked in front of dozens of physicians who examine old scars, manipulate joints, and review medical histories. An ACL repair from sophomore year is not just a story of resilience. It is a data point in a risk assessment model. A shoulder that once dislocated is a red flag. The players are reduced to a collection of past injuries and potential future breakdowns. They are not athletes being evaluated.
Just a little, doctor.
They are assets being underwritten. The combine turns the human body into a speculative instrument, and every scar is a crack in the potential investment. This is where the injury-prone label is born, a tag that can haunt a player for his entire career, regardless of its medical validity. The label is often a self-fulfilling prophecy rooted in perception, not reality. A player who missed games in college due to a fluke high ankle sprain or a broken bone, injuries that typically heal fully with no long-term consequences, can find his draft stock plummeting. Teams, armed with millions in guaranteed money for high draft picks, are inherently risk-averse. Why select player A, who has a clean bill of health but maybe slightly less athletic upside, when player B with breathtaking tape has that one medical question mark? The question mark becomes a scarlet letter. It means he will be drafted later for less money with lower expectations and with a shorter leash. From day one, the organization views him through a lens of fragility. He is given fewer practice reps to preserve him. Coaches may unconsciously shy away from designing plays that expose him to high-contact situations. When he does suffer a subsequent, unrelated injury, the front office nods grimly. See? We knew he was brittle. The label becomes his identity, shaping not only his opportunities but the very way the team invests in and utilizes his body. It is a preemptive form of forced retirement, a ceiling placed on his potential before he ever takes an NFL snap. The moment of drafting itself, for all its emotional release, contains the seed of this cold realization. The phone call from the general manager is joyous, but it is followed immediately by business. The player is no longer a college star. He is a draft pick, a slot value, a signing bonus calculation. His agent begins negotiating not just money, but offset language, injury guarantees, and workout bonuses, all mechanisms to protect the team's investment. The rookie minicamp is not an introduction to the NFL. It is an orientation for a high-value asset. He is given a playbook, but he is also given rules about off-field conduct, social media usage, and mandatory financial advising sessions. The team has a player engagement staff whose job is to manage the off-field life of the asset to ensure it remains focused and productive. The rookie's realization dawns slowly, then all at once. He is loved, but conditionally. He is valued, but quantitatively. His new coaches and executives speak about his upside and his floor, terms from the futures market. He is given a number and not just the one on his jersey. He is a line item, The camaraderie in the locker room is real, but it exists within a structure that views him at his core as a financial instrument. If he produces, the investment will be protected and even increased with a new contract. If he breaks, he will be repaired if the cost-benefit analysis justifies it. If he underperforms or becomes too expensive, he will be traded or cut, and the capital will be allocated elsewhere. The draft, therefore, is the origination point for the entire cycle of disposability. It is the annual infusion of new, cheap, hopeful labor into the system. The celebrated first-round pick is the shiny new vehicle, fresh off the lot with a full warranty. The late-round pick is the cost-effective model with fewer features. The undrafted free agent is the lottery ticket, but they are all entries in the same ledger. Their youth and health are their primary virtues. The draft's dark promise is that it offers a young man everything he has ever wanted, but in exchange, it asks for the one thing he cannot get back: the right to be seen as anything other than a physical and financial proposition. He enters the league not just as a player, but as a walking actuarial table, a collection of measurable traits and medical red flags, a dream that has been neatly packaged, priced, and sold to the highest bidder. The pop of the flashbulbs on draft night is the sound of the starting gun for a race against his own body's depreciation, a race he is destined to lose from the moment his name is called. The head coach is the most visible architect of a team's culture. He is the motivator, the strategist, the father figure. He is also the man caught in the cruelest paradox of professional football. His mandate is unambiguous: win games. His job security is measured in wins and losses, often on a weekly basis. Yet, he is also the steward of the health and well-being of 53 young men whose careers are frighteningly fragile. This is the coach's dilemma, a constant, grinding tension between the short-term imperative of victory and the long-term responsibility of preservation. Does he push a star quarterback with a sore throwing shoulder to practice on Wednesday, risking a more serious injury because the game plan needs reps? Does he listen to the training staff that wants to hold a veteran linebacker out of a physical Friday practice? Or does he side with the defensive coordinator who insists the unit needs the chemistry? Every decision is a gamble with someone else's body as the stakes. And in a league where next man up is both a philosophy and a threat, the pressure to choose winning now over protecting forever is immense, often overwhelming. Speaking to former coaches, you hear this tension echo in their language, even years after leaving the sideline. One retired head coach put it bluntly: "Your entire existence is short-term. You're thinking about this Sunday, then the next Sunday. The future is the playoffs, maybe next season if you're lucky. The owner isn't paying you to build a 5-year plan. He's paying you to win this week's game. So when a player comes to you and says, 'Coach, my knee is barking,' you have a split-second calculation. Is he hurt or is he just sore? Is this something he can play through? Because if he can, and you sit him and you lose by 3 points, the second guessing will eat you alive. And you know that player's backup is probably a 70% solution. So you look him in the eye and you say, 'I need you. The team needs you. Can you give me what you've got?' And 99 times out of 100, that player will say yes. Because he's been trained to say yes. And you've been trained to ask. This is not portrayed as malice. It is presented as a shared sacrifice, a test of collective will. But the power dynamic is utterly unequal. The coach holds the player's career in his hands through playing time and roster decisions. A no can be seen as a failure of toughness, a betrayal of the tribe. This pressure manifests most clearly in the daily grind culture of practices and training regimens. NFL practices, especially during training camp and the regular season, are not gentle affairs. They are full speed, full contact rehearsals for violence. The culture prioritizes toughness and repetition above all. Two-a-days in the blistering summer heat, though now limited by the collective bargaining agreement, were once a rite of passage designed to weed out the weak. Even today, practices are engineered to create a level of physical and mental fatigue that simulates the fourth quarter. The logic is sound from a football perspective. You must practice how you play. But from a medical perspective, it is a relentless assault on the body that increases the risk of soft tissue injuries, concussions, and cumulative wear. The line between preparation and punishment is intentionally blurred. A former player turned coach confessed. We used to have a period we called Oklahoma or Bull in the Ring. It was pure, unscripted, one-on-one violence. It served no strategic purpose other than to see who was the toughest, who would quit. We'd come out of those drills with guys spitting blood, with dinged-up shoulders, and we'd call it getting better. We were just breaking down the very bodies we needed on Sunday. The unplayable line, the one where motivation becomes coercion, is crossed in subtle, systemic ways. It is not about a coach ordering a player with a known concussion back into a game. That is now a fireable offense. It is about the environment created. It is the coach who publicly praises a player for being a warrior and playing through a broken hand. That praise sets a standard for everyone else. It is the coach who, when asked about a player's injury status, says, "He's a tough guy. We expect him to suit up." That public expectation becomes a mandate the player feels he cannot defy. It is the installation of a game plan that heavily features an already injured player, forcing him to either admit he can't do it or risk further damage trying. A veteran offensive lineman told me about playing with a torn pectoral muscle. It was a partial tear. I could play, but it hurt like hell every time I engaged. The coaches knew. The trainers knew. They gave me a special harness. But all week, the game plan was built around me pulling and leading sweeps, which was the one thing that put the most stress on that exact muscle. I didn't say no. What was I going to say? Redesign the offense? So I did it. I tore it completely in the third quarter. Was that the coach's fault? Not directly, but he created the conditions where my only choices were to be a hero or be a traitor. The coach's dilemma ultimately has no clean solution. He is a middle manager in a high-stakes corporation, answerable to an owner who demands results and to players who need protection. The systemic pressure forces most coaches to err on the side of the immediate. The future health of a player is abstract. The loss this Sunday is concrete. The player's long-term well-being is his own responsibility. The team's success is the coach's legacy. This conflict is baked into the job description. The result is a culture that systematically consumes the very bodies it relies on, led by men who are often complicit not out of cruelty, but out of a desperate need to survive in a world where their own professional mortality is even more fragile than that of the athletes they command. The coach may genuinely love his players, but he is forced to love winning more. And in that painful arithmetic, players are too often asked to spend their forever to buy the coaches now. The National Football League Players Association stands as the only institutional counterweight to the league's immense power. It is the union, the collective voice of the players, tasked with negotiating the rules of engagement for their dangerous profession. Its mandate is to protect them, to secure better pay, safer working conditions, and a measure of security for life after football. But the NFLPA walks a perpetual tightrope, stretched between competing priorities and hamstrung by the fundamental nature of the sport it represents. It must negotiate with a monopoly employer, balance the immediate financial desires of current stars against the long-term health needs of the rank and file, and fight for benefits for men who have already left the building, all while the league's revenue engine roars onward. The union's story is one of hard-fought gains and painful concessions, a chronicle of how difficult it is to build a safety net for men working in a profession designed to break them. Its limitations in preventing forced retirements are not necessarily failures of will, but often failures of leverage and foresight in the face of an opponent that holds most of the cards. The centerpiece of the union's power is the collective bargaining agreement, the massive, legally binding contract negotiated every decade or so. The CBA dictates everything from the percentage of league revenue players received to the number of padded practices allowed in training camp. Historically, the primary battles have been over money, the salary cap, free agency, the revenue split. Health and safety provisions have often been secondary bargaining chips, traded away for immediate financial gains. For decades, the league resisted acknowledging the link between football and long-term brain injury. The union, arguably slow to recognize the severity of the crisis itself, failed to make robust health protections and post-career disability benefits non-negotiable centerpieces of earlier agreements. The 2011 CBA, for instance, reduced off-season workouts and contact practices, a win for player safety, but it also instituted a wage scale for rookies that diverted money to veterans, a financial win that did nothing for long-term health. The trade-off is constant. Do we fight for more money in our pockets now, or for better healthcare and pensions that we may need later? For a young player with a short career horizon, the choice is often stark, and the immediate cash usually wins. Nowhere is the union's tightrope more visible than in the agonizing, decades-long fight over pensions and disability benefits. The NFL's pension plan, compared to other major sports leagues, has historically been lacking. For years, vested players, those with 3 or more credited seasons, could not collect their full pension until age 55, a lifetime away for a man forced out at 28. The 88 plan, named after Hall of Famer John Mackey, who wore number 88 and died from dementia, provides financial assistance for former players with dementia, but the process of qualifying is famously Byzantine and often requires a legal fight. The broader disability benefit system, run by a joint NFL-NFLPA board, is a labyrinth of categories: total and permanent, football degenerative, line of duty, each with different criteria and payout levels. The process of applying is described by former players as demeaning and adversarial, designed to deny claims rather than honor them. The union advocates for these men, but it is forced to do so from outside the process it helped create, often battling the same league it must collaborate with on active player issues. This leads to the fundamental critique of the union, the inherent conflict between representing active players and advocating for retired ones. The active players pay the union dues. They vote on the CBA. Their concerns, guaranteed money, franchise tags, practice squad salaries, are immediate and pressing. The needs of retired players, many of whom are suffering and bankrupt, are a moral imperative but not a direct political priority for the current membership. A former union official explained the tension. "You're in a negotiation room. The league says, we'll improve the disability plan for retired guys, but it'll cost us $50 million a year. That's $50 million that comes off the top before we split revenue with the current players. So that's less money for the salary cap. You have to go back to the player reps, many of them in their mid-20s, and say, we can get you an extra $1 million in cap space each, or we can significantly help the broken down guys from the 80s who you've never met. It's not a fair fight. The current stars who drive the league's popularity often secure the most guaranteed money and the most favorable rules for themselves, while the broader player welfare issues, which would benefit the majority of less heralded players, get squeezed. The union's tightrope is a reflection of the sport's inherent brutality and brevity. It is trying to build a lasting institution for a transient workforce. Its victories are real: free agency, increased minimum salaries, better health insurance during careers, and incremental improvements in safety protocols. But its failures are etched in the suffering of those who fell through the gaps. When a player is forced out, the union's ability to protect him evaporates. It can help him file for disability, it can offer transition programs, but it cannot give him back his health or his career. It negotiated the rules of the game that broke him. The NFLPA's ultimate limitation is that it is a union for a profession where the workers are the raw material. It can negotiate for better handling of the material, for a better price for the material, and for a better disposal package once the material is spent. But it cannot change the fundamental fact that the job is to consume the material. In the business of football, the union fights valiantly for a better deal, but it is ultimately bargaining over the terms of depletion. The forced retiree is the finished product of that process, a man for whom the union's hard-won protections often arrive as too little, too late, a testament to the difficulty of building a future for men in a system designed to live in the ruthless, profitable present. The story of the NFL is written in real time by its media partners. The broadcasts, the highlight shows, the talk radio debates, the endless online content. This ecosystem doesn't just cover the game. It shapes its mythology. And the mythology is one of glorious conflict, of heroes and warriors, of epic triumphs and heartbreaks contained neatly within the 60-minute frame. This narrative machine is essential to the league's popularity, but it also serves as a powerful engine of systemic amnesia. It celebrates the sacrifice while carefully editing out the carnage. It anoints warriors on Sunday and forgets their suffering by Monday, moving seamlessly to the next storyline. The media, often acting as an unwitting extension of the league's PR arm, perpetuates the very culture that leads to forced retirements by glorifying the act of self-destruction and then turning a blind eye to its long-term consequences. Listen to the language. It is a lexicon of sanitized violence and valorized pain. A player is dinged up, not concussed. He got his bell rung. A charming, anachronistic phrase that minimizes a brain injury. He is playing through pain, a badge of honor, never a dangerous compromise of his future health. A devastating hit is a highlight reel shot or a statement. The analyst in the booth marvels at a defender selling out his body, praising the very mechanism of his own potential destruction. This language frames physical ruin as virtue. It conditions fans, and more importantly young players, to see ignoring injury as the ultimate expression of commitment. The narrative arc for a player is clean. The dramatic rise, the peak, the struggle with injury, the triumphant return or the tragic decline, and then fade to black. The story ends with his release or retirement announcement. The camera leaves. The spotlight moves. What happens in the decades that follow, the chronic pain, the cognitive decline, the financial ruin, the search for identity, is not part of the football story as the media defines it. It is a postscript, a private tragedy unfit for the public spectacle. This is why the long-term consequences of career-ending injuries are so seldom followed. They are messy, undramatic, and antithetical to the product being sold. A documentary on a former player's struggle with CTE or opioid addiction is a downer. Complicates the Sunday fantasy. It implicates the viewer in the carnage. The business model of sports media is built on access and excitement. Teams grant coveted access to reporters who portray the organization in a favorable light. Broadcasting networks pay billions for rights fees and are incentivized to promote the game's glory, not its gore. Following the broken veteran as he navigates disability courts, divorce, and depression does not generate ratings. It generates discomfort. So, the media's attention span is perfectly aligned with the league's interest. Focus on the active player, the current drama, the next game. The wounded are relegated to occasional sentimental "where are they now?" features, often focusing on those who have successfully transitioned, not those drowning in the aftermath. The difficult, systemic stories are left to independent journalists or documentary filmmakers working outside the league's ecosystem. They reach a fraction of the weekly NFL propaganda machine. Perhaps the most potent paradox in this dynamic is the role of the former player turned analyst, the talking head. These men, often legends of the game, sit in polished studios and dissect the action. They have lived the pain. Many of them are dealing with the very consequences we are describing. And yet, to maintain their positions, to stay within the football fraternity, they often become the most vocal enforcers of the old culture. They dismiss concerns about violence as the game going soft. They question the toughness of players who sit out with concussions. They use their own experiences, "I played through worse," as a cudgel against a new generation attempting to set boundaries. A former linebacker, now a prominent analyst, might spend a segment lambasting a safety for a missed tackle, never mentioning that the safety is perhaps protecting himself from another brain-rattling collision. They are trapped. Their credibility is rooted in their participation in the warrior culture. To critique it too deeply would be to invalidate their own sacrifices and the identity they have built for their post-playing careers. So they become amplifiers for the system that consumed them, telling today's players to embrace the same destruction, perpetuating the cycle for the entertainment of the audience and the approval of the league that signs their checks. The media's amnesia is not a conspiracy. It is a function of commercial symbiosis. The NFL provides the content. The media provides the myth-making. In this partnership, the forced retiree is an inconvenient truth, a reminder of the bill that comes due. His story interrupts the narrative flow from one week's preview to the next week's recap. So he is quietly written out of the script. The cheering crowds, the dramatic music, the slow-mo highlights, all of it serves to create a dazzling distraction from the human cost. We are encouraged to marvel at the physics of the collision, not to ponder the biology of its aftermath. By celebrating the warrior and forgetting the wounded, the media performs a crucial service for the league. It makes the transaction seem noble, and it ensures that the darkness remains in the shadows, out of frame, where it cannot spoil the view of the beautifully lit, perfectly staged spectacle of the game. When we talk about a career ending, we focus on the player. The lost identity, the physical pain, the shattered dream. But a forced retirement is not a solitary explosion. It is a shockwave that radiates outward, devastating the lives tethered to that career. The spouse who built a life around the schedule. The children who knew their father as a superhero on television. The parents who watched their son achieve the pinnacle, only to witness his long, painful descent. They are the collateral damage, the silent casualties of the NFL's attrition model. They bear a burden they never signed up for, watching the person they love transform, often before their eyes, from a vibrant athlete into a man grappling with pain, uncertainty, and a profound sense of loss. Their story is one of love strained to its breaking point, of financial panic, and of a caregiving responsibility that arrives decades too early. The testimony of a wife, let's call her Sarah, is hauntingly common. She married a promising young linebacker. The early years were a whirlwind of moving cities, team events, and the peculiar fame of an NFL spouse.
Okay,
then came the injuries.
Right there.
Not one catastrophic hit, but the accumulation. The knee surgeries, the shoulder procedures. She watched him change. The hardest thing, she told me, wasn't the physical stuff. It was the emotional withdrawal. The game demanded everything from him, his focus, his emotion, his passion. When it was gone, it was like he had nothing left for us. He'd sit in his home office in the dark for hours. The man who used to be so lively, so present, just checked out. He was grieving, but he couldn't name it. He'd get angry over tiny things. He wasn't the man I married anymore. I was living with a stranger who was in constant pain, both physically and in a way I couldn't reach. For children, the shift is confusing and frightening. The dad who used to wrestle on the living room floor can now barely get down on his knees. The dad who was celebrated by thousands is now someone who yells at the TV on Sunday, bitter and resentful. The hero becomes human, flawed, and fragile in the most destabilizing way possible. Then comes the financial shock. Unless a player is among the elite few with fully guaranteed, long-term contracts, the end of a career means the abrupt end of a massive income stream. For every player making millions, there are dozens more earning the league minimum, living a comfortable but not extravagant life, with expenses often scaled to their playing income. The money stops, but the bills do not. The mortgage on the house bought during the good years remains. The car payments continue. The lifestyle, however modest by NFL standards, is unsustainable. Many players, encouraged by a culture of immediate gratification and poor financial advice, have saved little. The severance of an injury settlement or the final year's salary evaporates quickly. The family is plunged from stability into anxiety almost overnight. Sarah described the panic of watching their bank account shrink, of having difficult conversations about selling the house, about pulling the kids from private school. You go from planning your future to surviving the month, she said. The fear is constant. He's 31 with no degree, a broken body, and a resume that says professional athlete. What comes next? A job as a car salesman? A coaching gig that pays $40,000 a year? The math doesn't work. The dream died, and the bill for that dream arrived on our kitchen table. This crisis often forces the spouse, almost always the wife, into a dual role she never anticipated: caregiver and primary breadwinner. She becomes a de facto nurse, managing medication schedules, driving to doctor's appointments, and helping with daily physical therapy routines. She becomes a therapist, navigating her husband's depression, anger, and existential dread. And simultaneously, she often must become the chief financial officer, scrambling to find income, sometimes returning to a long dormant career or taking any job she can find to keep the family afloat. The relationship dynamic undergoes a seismic shift. The partnership that was once built on shared dreams and the excitement of his career becomes a clinical, stressful operation of management and survival. The romantic and emotional connection is often buried under the daily rubble of medical and financial logistics. The divorce rate spikes in the years following retirement for a reason. The strain is simply too great for many relationships to bear. Parents, too, carry a unique and terrible burden. They watch their son dedicate his youth to a sport, often supporting him through countless sacrifices. They felt the pride of his success, and then they watch helplessly as the sport discards him. A mother described watching her son, a former running back, try to play with his young children. He can't run. He can't even get up off the ground without groaning. He's 35 years old. I look at him and I see the little boy who ran everywhere, who was so full of life and energy. That boy is gone. The game took him, and I feel guilty. Did I push him too hard? Should I have steered him to another sport? You spend years being so proud, and then you're left with this aching feeling that you fed your child to a monster. The family's burden is one of silent witness and helpless love. They are on the front lines of the aftermath, cleaning up the wreckage of a crash they saw coming but were powerless to prevent. They are the ultimate proof that a forced retirement is never an individual event. It is a family crisis, a generational tremor that reshapes lives, fractures relationships, and leaves a legacy of pain that extends far beyond the individual whose name was on the jersey. The NFL's Darkside isn't confined to the locker room or the training table. It resides in the quiet, stressed homes of the men it used up, where the real, long-term cost of Sunday's glory is paid every single day. After the cheering stops, after the surgeries are done, after the identity crisis sets in, the final, demoralizing battle for many former players begins. The fight for what they were promised. The NFL, in conjunction with the Players Association, maintains a system of disability and pension benefits designed to provide a safety net for those broken by the game. In theory, it is a covenant. You sacrifice your body for our entertainment, and we will support you in your time of need. In practice, for countless men, it is a Kafkaesque gauntlet of bureaucracy, adversarial medicine, and legal obstruction designed not to help, but to deny. This is where the cold business of football meets its human consequence in the starkest terms. The fight for benefits is not about a handout. It is a war for recognition, for the admission that the game did, in fact, break them. And it is a war many are too damaged to wage and too poor to win. At the heart of the system is the Burt Bell/Pete Rozelle NFL Player Retirement Plan, administered by a board comprised of an equal number of representatives from the league and the union. To receive disability benefits, a former player must prove his injuries are total and permanent, and that they were sustained from activities related to NFL football. The process is notoriously Byzantine. It requires reams of medical documentation, evaluations by league-appointed doctors, and navigating a maze of categories. The most common and contentious categories are football degenerative, for conditions like arthritis believed to be caused by the wear and tear of the game, and the more recently established neurocognitive benefit, for conditions like dementia, Parkinson's, or ALS linked to repeated head trauma. The application itself is a full-time job, a daunting task for a man struggling with cognitive issues or chronic pain. And that is only the beginning. The league's appointed doctors often serve as gatekeepers, and their evaluations are frequently described as hostile and dismissive. Former players report being examined for mere minutes, having their symptoms questioned, and being told their disabilities are due to aging or pre-existing conditions unrelated to football. The infamous race norming scandal, uncovered in 2020, exposed how the league's neurocognitive testing had for years automatically assumed black players started with lower cognitive function, making it harder for them to prove mental decline. This was not a bug. It was a policy that systematically discriminated against a majority of former players for years. Even the 88 plan, named with honor for John Mackey, which provides up to $110,000 per year for former players with dementia, requires a diagnosis from a board-approved physician and is often mired in delays and disputes over the level of care required. What is presented as a benefit feels, to the applicants, like a fortress designed to keep them out. Consider the case of a former offensive lineman we'll call Robert. Robert played 12 seasons in the 1990s. He has had multiple knee and back surgeries. He suffers from debilitating arthritis, chronic pain, and has begun experiencing significant memory loss and confusion in his late 40s. 5 years ago, he applied for football degenerative and neurocognitive benefits. He submitted thousands of pages of medical records from his own doctors, all linking his conditions to his career. He was sent to a league-appointed orthopedic specialist. Robert described the examination. The guy had me bend over, touch my toes, which I can't do. Looked at my MRIs for maybe 30 seconds and said, Lots of people have back pain. He wrote a report saying my condition was not totally disabling and was consistent with normal aging. For the neurocognitive claim, the testing was a confusing battery of questions and tasks he felt designed to make him fail. He was denied. He appealed. The appeal was denied. He is now in the third year of a legal battle, paying lawyers out of his dwindling savings. His wife has had to return to work. The most insulting part, he said, is that the league's doctors, who never saw me play, who never saw me get carted off the field, get to tell me that what's wrong with me isn't from football. They're calling me a liar. They're calling my life a coincidence. This has spawned a small but vital industry of lawyers and advocates who specialize in navigating this legal gauntlet. These attorneys speak of a system engineered for denial. They point to the inherent conflict of the retirement board, where the league's representatives have a direct financial incentive to limit payouts. As the plan is funded jointly by the league and the teams, they document patterns of repetitive, scripted denials. The fight often requires obtaining and reviewing the reports of the league's doctors, hiring independent medical experts to rebut them, and preparing for hearings that can feel like court-martials. Where a former player's credibility and pain are put on trial, the process can take years. Many former players give up, broken by the bureaucracy and the psychological toll of being disbelieved. Others die before their claims are resolved. The lawyers become more than attorneys. They are lifelines, often working on contingency, fighting not just for money, but for a shred of dignity for their clients. The fight for benefits is the ultimate betrayal of the NFL's covenant. It takes the private suffering of the forced retiree and compounds it with public humiliation and bureaucratic cruelty. It forces a man who once displayed superhuman toughness to beg for help and then defends itself against him with legions of doctors and lawyers. This battle exposes the final, ugly truth. The league's concern for its former players is not a moral imperative, but a calculated liability to be managed. The benefits system is not a safety net. It is a filter designed to catch only the most persistent, the most legally supported, or the most obviously shattered. For every player who finally wins his claim after a years-long war, there are countless others languishing in the purgatory of the process, their bodies and minds failing, their resources evaporating, their final forced retirement from dignity now administered by the very institution that once promised to make them legends. Amidst the wreckage of forced retirements, there are stories of remarkable rebirth. Not every exit leads to a permanent darkness. Some men, through a combination of foresight, support, sheer force of will, and sometimes plain luck, manage to navigate the chasm between their football life and what comes next. They find a new purpose, a new identity, a new way to channel the discipline and drive that made them professionals. These stories of reinvention are crucial. They are not fairy tales meant to sanitize the system's failures, but rather testaments to human resilience that highlight what is possible when the transition is managed with intention and support. They prove that the skills forged on the field, leadership, teamwork, perseverance under pressure, are not worthless after the final whistle. They are simply currencies that need to be converted for use in a different economy. Take the story of a former defensive end we'll call Michael. A second-round pick, his career was cut short after 5 seasons by a chronic neck condition that made it unsafe to continue. He was forced out at 27. Unlike many, however, Michael had heeded the league's transition seminars. During his playing days, he interned in the off-seasons at a wealth management firm, curious about the business world that so many of his teammates struggled to navigate. When his career ended, he used his remaining savings to get an MBA, a grueling process of cognitive retraining after years of physical focus. He leaned on the discipline of film study to master finance textbooks. Today, he runs a successful sports-focused division of an investment firm, helping current players manage their money. His second career is built on the same analytical mind that dissected offensive tackles, just applied to balance sheets. Football taught me process, he says. The process of a pass rush, set up, counter, finish. It's the same in business. Research, strategy, execution. The arena changed. The mindset didn't. Other paths to reinvention are more public. Some players find a second life in media, becoming analysts or broadcasters. This path, while attractive, is highly competitive and often reserved for stars or those with particularly charismatic personalities. More commonly, players return to the game they love through coaching at the high school, college, or professional level. This allows them to stay connected to the culture and structure they know, but it requires a shift from performer to teacher, from being the weapon to being the armorer. Then there are those who become advocates, like the former players who now work for or founded nonprofit organizations dedicated to helping fellow retirees with brain health, financial counseling, or career transition. Their pain becomes their purpose. They are the wounded healers, using their hard-earned credibility within the fraternity to guide others through the darkness they themselves navigated. These success stories are often bolstered by programs that actually work. The NFL and NFLPA have, belatedly, improved their transition resources. The Player Engagement Department now offers more robust career internships, partnerships with academic institutions, and executive education programs. Independent organizations, often founded by former players or their families, have filled critical gaps. Groups like the Trust, founded by the NFLPA, the NFL Player Care Foundation, and independent entities like the Concussion Legacy Foundation provide everything from brain health assessments and medical referrals to career coaching and psychological support. What separates the effective programs from the window dressing is a focus on individualized, long-term support and a recognition of the psychological transition, not just the logistical one. They don't just hand a player a resume template. They help him answer the question, who am I now? This is the core of the reinvention struggle, the mental shift. It is the hardest work of all. It requires a player to deconstruct the monolithic identity of football player and rebuild a new, multifaceted sense of self. He must learn to value himself for his character, his relationships, his new skills for who he is, not what he did. This is a profound and painful psychological undertaking. It involves grieving the loss of his former self, a process our culture gives men little space or vocabulary to do. Successful reinventors speak of this period not as a sudden epiphany, but as a daily practice. It is saying, I am a father, a husband, a student, a businessman, and learning to believe it. It is finding validation in a closed deal, a mentored young athlete, a balanced family life, instead of in a sack or a touchdown. It requires humility to start over as a rookie in a new field. It requires the courage to ask for help, to be vulnerable, to admit what you don't know. All traits that were survival liabilities in an NFL locker room. The road back is never a return to what was. It is a forging of something new from the raw materials left behind. The men who walk it successfully are not proof that the system is fair or kind. Rather, they are evidence of the indomitable human spirit rising, often despite the system that discarded them. Their stories offer a flicker of hope in a dark landscape, a map for those who come after. They show that a forced retirement can be a beginning, not just an end, but only if a man is prepared to fight a second, even more demanding battle. The battle to redefine his own worth in a world that has already written him off. Their victory is personal, hard-won, and a silent rebuke to the machine that believed it had used them up. We have traced the arc of the broken dream, from the pop of a ligament to the silence of a forgotten name. We have followed the path from the operating table to the disability hearing, from the adrenaline of the stadium to the despair of the living room couch. But some stories have no second act. Some exits lead only to an early, and often tragic, final curtain. This final batch is for them, for the lost, not just those who died young, though they are its most haunting members, but for those whose lives became a slow-motion erasure, whose spirits were broken long before their bodies finally gave out. They are the ultimate testament to the cost. Their legacy is not a trophy or a statistic. It is a warning, written in pain and etched in grief. To look at them is to look into the darkest possible outcome of the system we have examined, and to ask if their sacrifice will ever force a true reckoning. Their names and faces form a mournful montage that spans generations. Junior So, the ferocious, smiling linebacker who took his own life with a gunshot to the chest, preserving his brain for study. It was ravaged by CTE. Ken Stabler, the swashbuckling snake, whose post-career cognitive decline and eventual death from colon cancer were accompanied by a CTE diagnosis. Mike Webster, the Hall of Fame center for the Steelers, who died at 50 after years of homelessness, dementia, and pain, the first NFL player to be diagnosed with CTE. Dave Durson and Ray Easterling, who also died by suicide. Andre Waters, Jovan Belcher. The list is long and growing. But the legacy of the lost is not confined to those who died from brain trauma. It includes the men who faded away in private agony. The former running back who became a recluse, crippled by arthritis and addiction. The lineman who died destitute, his body and finances equally bankrupt. The promising star whose light was snuffed out by one legal hit, who spent the next 40 years as a phantom of his former self. A what could have been story told in hushed tones at reunions. They are the human counter-narrative to the NFL's myth of glory. Their suffering is forcing a cultural reckoning, but it is a slow and conflicted one. Public perception is shifting, but in fits and starts. Fans are more aware of CTE. They understand the risks in a way they did not 20 years ago. Yet, on Sunday, the violence is still the draw. The big hit is still replayed. The warrior narrative still sells jerseys. There is a cognitive dissonance at the heart of the modern football fan. We know more, but we choose to look away because the spectacle is so compelling. The league, adept at managing perception, has implemented rule changes to protect players, particularly from head injuries. It funds concussion research, promotes its safety initiatives. This allows the average fan to assuage their conscience, to believe the game is now safe enough. But the fundamental equation remains unchanged. The game, at its core, requires violent collisions between supremely athletic men. The physics have not been repealed. The legacy of the lost asks us an uncomfortable question. Can you truly sanitize a spectacle whose essence is controlled brutality? Or does the attempt to make it safer simply make the inevitable tragedies feel more acceptable, more like calculated risks rather than systemic failures? This leads to the ultimate unanswered question that hangs over the entire enterprise. Can the NFL truly reform, or is forced retirement, in all its forms, from the sudden to the slow, an immutable part of its DNA? The evidence of these 15 batches suggests a grim answer. The economic model requires a constant churn of young, healthy, cheap labor. The entertainment product requires superhuman performance that pushes the human body beyond its sustainable limits. The cultural cachet is built on a myth of sacrifice that glorifies playing through pain. The business of bodies, the surgeon's knife, the painkiller pipeline, the coach's dilemma, all are subsystems of a larger machine designed to maximize output and minimize long-term liability. Forced retirement is not an accident in this system. It is the exhaust. You can try to clean the exhaust, to filter it, to make it less immediately toxic, but the engine still burns the same fuel. The finite physical capital of young men. The league can tweak the protocols, improve the benefits, and fund the research, but as long as the core product is what it is, there will always be a steady stream of broken men leaving the game before they are ready, carrying with them the seeds of future suffering. The threads of our journey all weave into this somber tapestry. The catastrophic hit and the slow bleed are the two methods of destruction. The mind's prison and the phantom limb are the psychological aftermath. The painkiller pipeline and the surgeon's knife represent the medicalized management of the crisis. The business of bodies and the draft's dark promise are the economic engine. The coach's dilemma and the union's tightrope are the moral conflicts within the system. The media's amnesia is the propaganda arm. The family's burden is the collateral damage. The fight for benefits is the final, insulting betrayal. And the rare stories of reinvention are the flickering proof of human resilience against these colossal odds. Every broken dream we have followed is a data point in a vast, tragic experiment. The legacy of the lost is the control group, the ones for whom the experiment had the most catastrophic results. They are not outliers. They are the logical, if extreme, conclusion of the process. They force us to look at the NFL not as a sport, but as a system with predictable human costs. Their memory demands more than moment of silence before a game. It demands a fundamental honesty about what we are watching and what we are asking these men to do. As the final seconds tick away on this investigation, we are left not with a solution, but with a burden of knowledge. The roar of the crowd will return. The spiral will still fly, but now we know the price of its beauty. We have heard the pop in the silence. We have seen the legacy of the lost, and we can never claim we didn't know. We began in silence, the heavy, ringing quiet of an empty stadium, and after this long journey through the broken dreams of men, we return to it. But now the silence is no longer empty. It is filled with echoes. The echo of a knee popping on a shallow cross. The echo of a veteran's joints creaking like a rusty gate at dawn. The echo of a panicked heartbeat in a team meeting. Of a wife's worried sigh over a stack of bills. Of a gavel striking in a disability hearing. Of a phone that never rings. These are the sounds of the NFL's Darkside, the soundtrack that plays behind the roar. We set out to follow the arc of a career to its unplanned, often brutal stopping point. What we found was not a series of isolated tragedies, but a pattern, a cold, efficient, and devastatingly logical system. The personal catastrophes of forced retirement are not accidents. They are the designed outcome. Synthesis is the act of seeing the whole picture. The hit that never ends and the slow bleed are two sides of the same coin. The body's finite tolerance for violence. The mind's prison and the phantom limb are the psychological scars from that violence, the internal wreckage. The painkiller pipeline and the surgeon's knife represent the medical-industrial complex that manages the wreckage, often extending careers artificially while deepening the long-term debt. The business of bodies and the draft's dark promise reveal the economic engine, a futures market in human health. The coach's dilemma and the union's tightrope show the human beings trapped within the machine's gears, making impossible choices. The media's amnesia is the public relations wing that sanitizes the product. The family's burden is the fallout that lands far from the field. The fight for benefits is the final, grueling battle for a shred of accountability. And the legacy of the lost is the permanent monument to the system's ultimate cost. Each batch a chapter. Together, they form an indictment of a business model that consumes youth and discards the used. This forces us to radically reframe the concept of value in professional football. On the league's ledger, value is measured in cap savings, in yards per carry, in quarterback ratings, in jersey sales. It is a transient number, peaking in a man's mid-20s and depreciating swiftly. But the true cost, the human cost, is measured in a different currency entirely. It is measured in years of quality life lost, in decades of chronic pain, in mornings a father cannot play with his children, in memories that slip away like smoke, in the quiet despair of a man who no longer recognizes himself. The trade is obscene. A few years of spectacular Sundays in exchange for a lifetime of diminished Mondays. The touchdown, the sack, the championship, these are the shiny deliverables. The arthritis, the cognitive fog, the addiction, the bankruptcy, these are the hidden fees. The league expertly externalizes these costs, pushing them onto the individual player and his family, off its own balance sheet and into the private suffering of broken lives. We have celebrated the value on the field. We have ignored the far greater debt accrued off it. This leads to the most uncomfortable reflection of all, our own complicity. The American bargain with football is a Faustian one. We, the fans, are the demand that drives the supply. Our devotion, our television ratings, our fantasy leagues, our ticket purchases, they fund the entire machine. We crave the violence even as we wince at it. We celebrate the warrior while turning a blind eye to the wounded. We have been willing participants in the amnesia, preferring the simple myth of glory to the complicated, painful truth of the aftermath. We have allowed the league to sell us a sanitized version of sacrifice, because to acknowledge the full, grotesque reality would spoil the fun. It would implicate us. But after bearing witness to these stories, after hearing the echoes in the silence, can we continue to watch with the same innocent eyes? Can we separate the beauty of the spiral from the broken hand that may never throw it again? Our love for the game is real, but so is the damage it does. We must now ask ourselves if our entertainment is worth their eternity of consequences. There will be no neat resolution here. The crisis is ongoing. The machine continues to run. A new draft class will arrive this spring, full of hope and unblemished bodies. They will hear the roar and believe it is for them, forever. Most will learn, too late, that the roar is fickle, that it belongs to the spectacle, not the performer. The league will continue to reform at the edges, implementing new safety protocols, improving helmets, funding studies. These are good and necessary things, but they are adjustments to the machinery, not a redesign of its fundamental purpose. As long as the product is predicated on spectacular collisions, the human body will lose. Forced retirement, in some form, will remain the inevitable end state for the majority of men who enter the league. It is the exhaust of the engine. We can try to make it cleaner, but we cannot stop its production without turning the engine off. So we end not with an answer, but with a burden. The burden of knowledge. The next time you see a player carted off the field, you will not just see an injury. You will see the beginning of a long, lonely journey into silence. The next time you hear a coach praise a player's toughness, you will hear the subtle coercion of the system. The next time you see a veteran released in a salary cap move, you will see a human asset being written off a ledger. The game will look the same, but you will see it differently. The shadow will now be visible to you, stretching long behind every highlight. The NFL is the greatest story ever sold. A story of triumph, of heart, of Americana. But we have now read the footnotes, written in pain and etched in loss. The broken dreams are not a subplot. They are the central, tragic theme. The men who are forced out are the truth the myth was built to conceal. Their stories are the legacy. And their silence, in the end, is the loudest sound of all. The stadium is empty. The lights are off. But if you listen closely, in the quiet you can still hear them. The echoes of the broken. A permanent reminder of the price of our Sunday devotion.